Welcome to another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusick. I was the founding drummer of Maroon 5, but I'm now a licensed therapist, author, and mental health advocate. With me, as always, is my co-host, Duck Maylard. How you doing, Duck?
Good. I'm feeling something's different. Something's changed. Our configuration.
Oh, I didn't notice.
You didn't notice that? Yeah, we decided to mix things up a little bit and get a little more forward facing for our guests because I was tired of hurting my neck. So,
well, I give you a lot of credit for this. I mean, I did end up doing a lot of the heavy lifting, I will say.
Literally.
However, the impetus for this was your idea. When you're recording, oftentimes you're comparing to what you see on social media these days because everything is kind of up close with a ring light and people are just kind of like blown out.
Confessional almost.
Yeah.
There's a camera right in your face.
And you are, you know, a cinephile and a filmmaker and somebody who appreciates depth and blocking. And these
so
things.
we brought in Roger Deakins, ASC cinematographer, to set this up for us now. No, but I just thought it would be a little bit more conducive to a more kind of laid-back conversational feel to make it more of a kind of a round table for when we have guests. And I think we've already done an interview today, and I think it was a smashing success.
Well, I'm impressed that we were able to pull this off to whatever extent. I mean, we haven't seen the finished product yet, but
it's funny that you say you did a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
I wanted to try to not save you from that, but I wanted to help. But I knew that once you got started on this project, that you were going to send me pictures of I moved this and I did this. What do you think? Now, and then the next day it's I completely changed it. I did all, I knew that you were going to start, go fall into the rabbit hole of just keep tweaking and which is good. I mean, it's your personality.
Well, what happened for me is something that it usually happens when it comes to change.
Initially very resistant.
And I'm like, oh no, oh God, we're gonna have to reinvent the wheel. And it's just panic sets in. And I've learned about myself that if I just sleep on it, sometimes it's a day, sometimes it's a couple days, and then come back to it. Usually in that matter of time, I go from panic to actual excitement. I don't know why I feel like I need to always conserve things the way they are. If something's working, don't mess with it. It's kind of the way that I feel. But at the same time, it's but then you'll never know if there's something better.
That's true.
If you don't try the change.
I think it's definitely, there's a personality type because my wife is the exact same way. Mm-hmm. It was traumatic when she would come home from school and her mom had rearranged her room and forced her to put it back. I love changing things every couple of months, put the bed over here, sleep in the alcove, see what happens, you know? Yeah. And if you don't like it, you can always move it back. That's what I always say. But it's definitely, there's a personality type that enjoys kind of mixing things up and one that definitely pushes back against it.
Well, you saw what happened with me in real time when you came over and you saw that I had already moved stuff around. It looked good in here, but I was being very geometrical in terms of the lines and the angles.
You moved around, baby.
Yeah, and you were like, well, why don't we close the angle? I was like, ooh, that's more than
it's
a 90
degrees.
Yeah, I was like, well, if we change it, then we might not ever get it back to exactly the way that it is now. And it's but who cares? But for some reason in my mind, I'm well, if it's already good now,
right?
I don't want to lose that. So anyway, we don't need to get into the weeds about it.
Anyway, it's the new set. Enjoy. Same set, but just slightly different shape.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question. If you've ever noticed something about me.
Oh.
Have you ever noticed me making little weird sounds like clicking or sniffs or You ever hear me do that?
I can't say that I do.
Good.
Okay.
But that's been a tick of mine since my anxiety became an issue 20 some odd years ago. Is that I will, and I think it was because a lot of it manifested in my throat, this feeling of a gag reflex. So I would constantly be and I always kind of try to loosen those muscles. And it was a way to relieve that pressure in my mind, which, as we know, it would just come right back because I'm not dealing with the issue.
Right.
But it was something that I used to do a lot. And my family would hear it, be like, oh, you're still doing that clicking thing. And I'd be like, shut up, I'm trying,
Yeah.
But it was something that it manifested in a way that, and even to this day, sometimes if I'm really stressed about something, if I can scratching at my throat and things like that, I can always, it was always around my throat. I remember hearing stories about Jim Carrey when he was doing The Grinch, and he would be in 8 hours of makeup and he'd be putting all this stuff on it. He'd start to have like little mini panic attack. I've had some prosthesis. I've had stuff on me where you start to feel a little claustrophobic, and it's a good thing. He'd keep a marble in his pocket and he'd just roll his finger on a marble or something. So I was curious.
Like a fidget spinner.
Yeah, exactly. If you ever had any tics like that or anything?
Yes. The answer is absolutely yes. The first manifestation when I was a teenager up through my early 20s was in my throat and mouth and that sort of thing. And I would have tension in my jaw and a feeling of, and even actually before I even knew that I had anxiety as a kid, my mom used to always wonder why all of the necks on my shirts were all stretched out. I remember her saying, like, were you like strangled or hanged in a former life?
Right.
There was one thing that I used to do that actually my roommate commented on, and he thought I was just fucking with him because we were sitting next to each other watching TV one night, and I just get this overwhelming urge to make a sound, to go, like the vibration of that, I guess, relaxed the muscles or something. I couldn't stop myself from doing it. I'm like, don't do it. And he would like look at me, and I'd be like, what? And then we'd stop, and then like 5 minutes later, and then he'd be like, wait, are you making a sound? And I was like, no, what are you talking about?
It was mortifying.
Yeah.
It's mortifying to be caught. It's like you're playing with yourself or something. Like you feel like someone has seen this deep, dark secret of like, I'm going to do this for myself.
Yeah.
And now someone else is picking up on it.
Well, I played it off like I was, he thought I was fucking with him. Like, like, he's like, you're making a sound. Are you? I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not making a sound.
You were like Jones in Police Academy, like,
yeah, exactly.
Tires are going.
What was also happening for me, I think, was like, of course, as anxious people, you go to the worst case scenarios. Like, is this going to get worse?
Yeah.
But it definitely was in my throat. And I to this day, I mean, I lived with a partner for 20 plus years, and she always knew when I was on edge or anxious, because she'd be like, how are you doing? You okay? And I'd be like, why? And she's like, well, you're clearing your throat a lot, or you're sniffling a lot. And I was like, I wasn't even aware I was doing it.
Funny that we had the same basic tick. You know, I mean, that's interesting.
Yeah. Or if I'm in an interview or about to go on stage to speak, I'll have this conscious thought of like, oh, I need to clear my throat. I need to make sure that I don't have a crab in my throat or something. And so I'll go, and then like swallow, make sure I'm swallowing whatever spit I have in there. And then I'll like get stuck. I'm like, and I'm like, oh, crap. And I have to. I'm like, hold on. And then I'm like, why did I do that to myself? I was fine.
Clearing your throat compulsively makes your throat hurt.
Exactly.
All the time.
It's self-defeating, and it's a perfect sort of example of the ways in which sometimes something that is adaptive becomes,
you think is helping you. Yeah.
It becomes a problem and self-defeating when it goes out of control.
Yeah. How interesting.
Yeah.
Let's get to our guest, shall we?
We shall, because it's a great guest and a really cool conversation. I hadn't heard of this guy until he was introduced to us, and then I looked him up, and I was like, wow, what an interesting life. He has accomplished things that I'm going to say a very small
subset of
group. And he's also number one in the world. He is the champion of this world. Freediving. If for those of you who aren't aware of what that is, it's diving to the depths or diving long periods of time underwater without breathing, without a tank. He even does like these long distance things where I think he swam the channel in like 10 hours or something like that. And a world champion, and just really one of these guys who has gone to the depths, literally, to reach another level of potential and performance in what he does.
He's the first athlete that we've had.
Is that so?
But the professional, right, in terms of he's a record holder,
right.
Real record holder. One of the things when we talked about forming this podcast was performance, in terms of arts and music and acting, but also sports.
Yeah.
People who are performing at a physical level have a lot of mental issues that they need to deal with and get a hold of. And so I think it's great that we finally get to have somebody on to talk about it.
Well, it is a different kind of conversation. I've only met a handful of professional athletes in my life. I've obviously known a lot more professional performers, musicians, actors, those types of things. And it is a very different kind of personality. And it is much more about the mindset of peak performance as opposed to how you best achieve creativity and expression in your art. But I think that a lot of people, athletes, artists, or otherwise, are curious about the people who are able to perform at the very highest level and control the things that oftentimes trip us up in our ability to perform, not just in, extreme ways, but just everyday ways, in terms of like, how do you harness your potential to be able to walk into a boardroom and give a great presentation, diving down 100 meters and holding your breath, or throwing 100-mile-an-hour fastball, and just everyday stuff. And how do I harness, the best version of myself?
And I think you mentioned it multiple times on this podcast of, a holistic approach of approaching it all. It's not just, he doesn't just worry about being the best swimmer. It's about diet and mindset and sleep patterns. I think about LeBron James, who famously spends $1 million a year on just recovery, body recovery and sleep. And, it's like the athletes and the people who are most successful in life don't just, how can I be the best CEO? How can I be the best guitar player? How can I be the best basketball player? It's how can I be the most efficient overall person, and that means emotionally, physically, mentally, all those things. And so Williams talks a lot about that, about how, the diving that he does and the approach that he takes to it transfers very easily to a mindset and approach to life, because there's so much that goes into creating the overall picture of a complete human.
Yeah. Thanks for setting it up. That was perfect. Let's dive right into it here.
Yeah, I'm gonna let it slide.
Okay. Well, if I had intended to do that,
we've already said we plumbed the depths, and now we're diving in.
We're diving in.
Let's go deep. Shall we go deep?
Let's go deep. Without any further ado, here's our deep conversation with our guest, William Trubridge, on the Harder to Breathe podcast. William Trubridge, welcome to Harder to Breathe.
Thank you, Ryan.
So I was kind of reading up on you in preparation of this, and as we were saying beforehand, I would love for this to just be kind of a free-flowing conversation. However, I do have one question I want to ask you to get things rolling, because I know that you are a world record holder in a lot of different categories in terms of free diving. You go down 100 meters underwater without breathing for like 8 minutes at a time. Well, you can correct me in a second. Or you have held your breath for 8 minutes or something like that.
That's the one, yeah. That dive takes 4 minutes because I'm moving.
Takes 4 minutes. Okay, got it. Okay, well, there's a lot of stats that are just like completely foreign and unbelievable to me. I want to ask you a question that as a therapist like me would never ask a client, but I'm going to ask you, and that is, are you fucking crazy?
Sometimes I wonder. Maybe you can tell me at the end of today.
At the end of the session, we'll let you know.
So what possesses a human being to begin to do this kind of thing in the first place? How did you come upon this way of life that is so extreme in terms of diving to these depths, and what is the origin story for that?
So in a sense, it was always there, because as a kid, I was born in the UK, but my family sold the house there and brought a boat to sail across the Atlantic, Caribbean, Pacific Ocean over the course of 5 years and arrive in New Zealand when I was 5. So my earliest kind of memories were living on the water, playing in the sea. The sea was like a supermarket, highway, school, everything.
It's your backyard.
Backyard.
To play, Mom. Yeah.
So for me, it was just a natural place to explore and to be. And when I found out about the sport of freediving, it was kind of like coming home. And as well as that, it also ticked all the boxes for me, because it's a mental and a physical challenge. And I'd had in the past challenges that were purely one of those, such as like I played chess competitively as a kid, just mental. So you're kind of fidgety and you've got all this physical energy. And then I rode at university for a while, which is amazing, but it's purely like brute force physical. Whereas, yeah, the freediving combined the two. It's 100% activation of the mind and the body.
Because I've seen, I remember seeing clips of like abalone and pearl divers, like diving deep for extended periods of time, just as like a a career thing. You know, they're having to hold their breath for a really long time. But is there any correlation between, like, is that where this started? You know, were people who were doing this for a vocation, who was like, hey, I can also hold my breath for 5 minutes. Who knew? You know what I mean?
For some people, it definitely started like
Yeah.
that. There's many different cultures all over the world. For instance, in the Philippines, you have the Bajau fishermen who still dive in a similar way,
Mhm.
very rudimentary, and can hold their breath a long time. There's the pearl fishermen, pearl divers in the Pacific, in the Polynesian islands.
I think that's what I've seen. Yeah.
Sponge divers in Greece, who were diving to crazy depths back 100 years ago. So all these different cultures, I guess, evolved freediving independently. And from that, now we have the sport where it's an actual discipline.
So when did it become competitive for you? Why pursue it as a competitive thing?
Yeah, I became competitive when I was about 22, 23, and I realized it was something that I wanted to devote myself to.
Mm-hmm.
And so the competitive side, is a way to get sponsors that allow you to train and really dedicate yourself, but it's also kind of the only way that I can realize what is, for me, the kind of the crux of it, which is pure human aquatic potential. Like, how deep are we as a species? How far can we penetrate or assimilate into this underwater world and become aquatic?
Aquatic potential. I like that. I like that phrase. So does that presume that we as humans are meant to explore in these ways in the water? Is that what you're saying?
In a sense, we actually harbor, all mammals have a diving reflex, which is this set of reflexes that kick in when you're underwater, especially when you're holding your breath. And it enables you to conserve oxygen so you can stay down longer. You can shut down the systems that aren't necessary for survival underwater and conserve the remaining oxygen. And in our lifetimes, we can train that to become more enhanced to the point, where we're not like a seal or a dolphin, but we can kind of do okay within the course of one lifetime.
That's why you can throw a baby in a pool and they'll just go. They know not to take a breath in. They just sort of instinctively shut down, right?
And in fact, babies actually have better blood than we do for breath hold. They have a more efficient form of hemoglobin for binding to oxygen. And they have that, as you said, that natural reflex to hold their breath and even swim like a rudimentary breaststroke. They lose it after about 6 months. But if you take your baby into the water, like within 6 months after birth, then they have like this natural affinity. And it makes sense, because what are they doing for the first 9 months of their existence? They're swimming around inside the mother's tummy.
What are some of the systems you said that can like shut down when they're unnecessary underwater?
So I could talk for
please,
ages
this is
on this,
fascinating.
but the major one is that there's this thing called the blood shift, where the blood is shunted from the extremities. So you have vasoconstriction, which is the constriction of the blood vessels, same as you do when you get cold. And that pushes the blood into the core and pushes it away from the muscles. So now, without blood flow, the muscles are forced to work anaerobically, which conserves oxygen for the heart and the brain, which are the only two organs that actually require it. Like your bicep can continue working for minutes without any oxygen or blood flow.
Mine does. Mine's just spectacular.
But the brain, even after a few seconds with no oxygen, will start to have issues.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that you kind of conserve that oxygen for the organs that can't do without it. And as well as that, you have a splenic contraction that is like a sponge, a muscle like a sponge that squeezes fresh blood cells, fresh red blood cells into circulation. And you get hypometabolism, and metabolism slows down, the heart rate slows down, and many other smaller effects. So all of these combine to make you more oxygen efficient. And seals and whales have the same thing, just to a nth degree. For instance, like a whale's heart rate can slow down to 7 beats per minute.
Yeah.
Whereas ours, the lowest I've recorded mine during a dive or a breath hold was 28 or 29, which is a lot lower than when I'm sleeping or resting.
So you mentioned that it's both mental and physical, and that gives us some idea of the physical aspect, and just obviously just physically being able to swim down to depths and back up and control your breath, to hold your breath physically, it hadn't even really occurred to me how much of a mental exercise that is in terms of maintaining your composure, because you or I will probably lose our shit at just a couple meters down.
Yeah.
You're going to need a breath when your heart starts racing, when things start happening. It's the mental exercise of staying calm. When did that come into the equation for you? Was that something you had early on, or did you figure out how to tame the what the mind might do to be self-defeating?
No, I definitely learned it as I went.
Okay.
There weren't techniques that I had or even knew about before I started freediving. And so the ocean or the sport forces you to confront that side, forces you to develop those techniques. And I often say that freediving is like this perfect test tube experiment in extreme stress management. Because if you imagine you're lying on the surface of the water, trying to be relaxed, trying to slow your heart rate and your breathing, knowing that in 2 minutes, you have a countdown, in 2 minutes time, you're going to take one last breath of air and then descend to like 30 stories, deeper than the height of the Statue of Liberty, underwater. And if you let that kind of breed anxiety in you or stress you out, then you're going to consume oxygen faster, which is going to make it more likely that you're going to be unsuccessful, that you're going to black out.
Right.
And so knowing that makes you more nervous or anxious, and it's a feedback loop, right? And the more anxious you get, the more you're aware of that anxiety and that how it's going to impact the dive. And so you kind of go round and round, and it can spiral out of control like that, even before the dive starts.
Yeah.
To say nothing about like when you're at depth, if something goes wrong and you have to be able to stay composed and stay relaxed and not kind of try and swim helter-skelter back to the surface, because that's going to use your oxygen faster than is efficient. And so in all these instances, you have to be 100% in control. Being forced to maintain composure in those scenarios, develop an affinity or keep an eye out for what works in those occasions, and also listen to other people who have experienced similar things, and in this process develop kind of an arsenal of tools and techniques in order to keep the mind relaxed and calm.
So this was self-taught? You didn't have somebody that trained you in how to do that or anything?
No, I've had like mentors along the way, but most of my freediving career I've been self-taught. But a lot of these techniques, like I wouldn't call them my own. They're kind of a conglomeration of other techniques from yoga, from many other different disciplines, and then just seeing what works, trying different things, mental techniques, and seeing what fits. Yeah, process of trial and error, I guess.
Well, you're an interesting person to talk to about anxiety, because as a therapist, so much of what we talk about when somebody's having issues with anxiety is about the fact that our mind is projecting onto things more than what's actually happening. It's like if you have a fear of public speaking, you have some fear of something disastrous happening. In reality, you're not going to die. At worst, you might stumble over your words or blank or something. It's not life and death. This kind of situation, it literally is life or death. And so the stakes are a lot higher than it is for the average person that's having anxiety, social anxiety, or other kinds of everyday anxiety. So, for most people, that would be a deal breaker. For me, it's like, well, why would I put myself in that position where my anxiety might be the reason why I die?
Yeah.
But you choose to put yourself in that position. And I don't know, that's fascinating in and of itself. But I want to ask you first, what does that experience tell us about everyday anxiety?
Yeah, definitely. It gives you perspective, right? Because when you confront something that is, I would argue if it's life or death, because we have safety systems, but it feels like life or death, right? When you confront that and you are able to use these techniques in order to stay calm, then you're like, oh, well, this other shit is like, is nothing, right? Like public speaking or the job interview, whatever it is, that's not life or death. That's got no kind of, not as much weight on it. And so it helps to, put everything in perspective in that sense. And so we're actually using freediving and these methods as a tool for people to kind of expand the boundaries of what they think they're capable of
Right.
and how much pressure or anxiety they think that they can manage. So often by kind of like overdoing it, you can expand your comfort zone, so to speak.
Because I remember that feeling. I mean, we've all been swimming, and there's been a time when you're a kid and you're in the pool and you're too deep and you're like, you're swimming for the surface, and that feeling of panic, like you say. And I can easily make a 1-to-1 comp of a panic attack where I remember that feeling of the same thing of like, oh no, I know this feeling is coming and I can't do anything to stop it. My heart is racing. And having that perspective, the ability to kind of say, wait a minute, I'm not swimming for the surface. I'm just metaphorically swimming to try to get back to, I think is very helpful in terms of, getting you to realize, like you say, it's not life or death. It is just your mind over matter type of thing. But there must have been, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into this, but there must have been once or twice where something's gone wrong or where you've been down too deep and you don't have enough time to get back up. Like, is there a specific thing that comes to mind where you're like, okay, well, this time I did go too far and this time I did black out, or...
Yes, there have been unsuccessful dives, many of them. In any sport, you have to, if you're going to try and set a world record, you have to be kind of pushing the envelope and getting close to those depths in training. And sometimes it's not the day, or you make a mistake, or you just push a little bit too much. Luckily in our sport, if that's the case, if you haven't gone way past your mark, then you're going to run out of oxygen close to the end of the dive, which is when you're close to the surface. And so we have safety divers who are then able to, they escort you for the last kind of 30 meters of the ascent. And if anything happens, they will bring you to the surface as fast as you can swim.
Okay.
And we have this, as we talked about before, this instinct to close our mouth even when we black out. So the water doesn't come into the lungs. And as you are brought to the surface and the face is exposed to air, there's again nerves which can detect that and bring you back to consciousness. And that's assisted by like blowing across the face and other techniques.
I just saw a video of a guy that was blacking out on the way up, and they had him up, they got the mask off, and they're going, breathe, like they're trying to convince him because he's still holding his breath. He's still like semi-conscious, but he's sort of like, and they're blowing in his face and stuff. And so that's the instinct to just not breathe, right? Even when you're unconscious.
Yeah, it takes a few seconds after you're brought to the surface for that instinct to
Subside,
dissipate. But then you will spontaneously breathe again. And so those cases are very benign. You still have plenty of blood flow and oxygen to the brain. So there's not going to be any permanent damage there. So luckily, if something like that happens in training, yes, it's not a critical situation, but it's obviously something we want to avoid. It's a failure, and it will hit you and your confidence a lot afterwards. And so the fear of that failure is what creates the stress and the anxiety before the dive. That's what we have to mitigate. And as well as kind of like putting it into perspective by thoughts like, okay, if something happens, my safety divers are here, they're going to get me, those kind of positive reinforcing thoughts. We also have techniques, again, mental and physical, because stress comes at us in both directions, right? Through like agitation or tension or changes in breathing when we're stressed. So the physical part is based on like a reverse hack that engineers a calm state that activates your parasympathetic nervous system through a specific type of breathing, which is nasal diaphragmatic breathing. So that's the physical side. And then the mental side is something that I call observer mind, which is kind of a form of mindfulness, where you are dissociating yourself from all information or data that's coming to your awareness. And we can go deep into this one, but basically seeing everything, including your own thoughts and emotions, as contents to your awareness, and you are just the awareness itself. So you have that detachment. And so those two arms, this is combine what I call the mental immune system, but those two together, the physical and the mental systems, allow you to stave off the extreme anxiety or stress that would otherwise kind of leak in these situations, like a deep free dive.
That's interesting. There's a lot of different theoretical orientations that talk about something similar to that from slightly different angles. And what you're describing goes all the way back to Eastern philosophy, of course, like talking about consciousness being something that is separate from our thoughts and our emotions and our behaviors, that our consciousness exists beyond just what we impose onto the present moment with our thoughts and our emotions. And then if we're able to become a part of universal consciousness and what is, and without imposing our own fears, anxieties, insecurities, desires, or anything onto it, we just accept what is and what is, just with awareness, with consciousness, then we are not a slave to the things that cause us pain and distress in that moment. That's, you mentioned mindfulness. That's kind of the basis for mindfulness, is the idea that we can achieve that state through meditation, through practicing mindfulness in our living, in the way that we live. For instance, internal family systems or parts work, as we call it. It's like we have these different parts of our consciousness that serve different functions, and they're evolutionarily helpful in some ways in terms of survival. Right? Like if you have certain traumas, you might have had to create a certain part of you to adapt and deal with that trauma to get through that.
Like an identity?
Yeah, like a separate identity that you step into. Like, for instance, for me, the perfectionist is one part of me that comes out to try to create control over certain situations. But in other situations, it doesn't serve me very well because it becomes self-defeating, because I'm self-critical, and it creates a whole paradigm of living up to something that oftentimes I'm falling short of. And so in that instance, we refer to the authentic self versus this other part that is just a protector part, something dealing with a threat or a perceived threat. So are you kind of getting to the point where what I don't understand is how these things are legitimate threats, right? You have to deal with things that are at hand that you have to deal with in terms of how am I going to get from here to here? How much am I going to have to utilize my skill set as a swimmer? So there seems to be a gray area here between this nirvana state that you need to achieve to be Zen and that sort of thing and be separate from your thoughts and emotions, and also being present enough to adapt and react to,
I'm going to die. I got to get to the surface.
Yeah, to react to whatever the threat may be that's in that moment and be able to execute it with peak performance. So how do you kind of match those things?
Yeah, good question. And it's a really subtle one because I think the crux of the problem is that we have fears, which are often irrational, like a phobia is an irrational fear, right? And then we have instincts, which are informing us about something that the subconscious mind is trying to tell us. It's processing 10,000 times more data than our rational mind. And so it sees all this information, processes it, and tells us, okay, there's a threat here, or there's something that is actually we need to take care of. So that's the instinct. And we need to be able to listen to that and set aside the fears. The problem is they're both communicated to us through the subconscious, through the gut, you could say. It's like a feeling, like a visceral feeling rather than an actual thought. And so knowing how to distinguish between the two is a real subtlety. For me, at least, being kind of like a lifetime work in this sport. But I feel like now I'm definitely a lot better than when I started at distinguishing between the two. And often, if you cannot tell in the moment, then questioning it, kind of like an understanding, or you can just see what the cause is, and it's because, I don't know, because you were stressed that morning or something happened to you and now you're just like a little bit bent out of shape. So it is a difficult one.
But especially for you in real time, because again, for me, if I'm on stage and I'm feeling a certain way, I go, okay, is this the sandwich I ate before the show, or is this because I'm feeling anxious? And I have the time to kind of figure that out. You're dealing with that in a very critical moment of, okay, I'm 50 meters down. Is this doubt creeping in? Is this like hypoxia? Is it like, am I losing oxygen? You know what I mean? I mean, that's a much more of a challenge for you in real time, right?
Definitely. But even that process, I think, can be outsourced to a certain extent to the subconscious mind. So now I'm only ever all these thoughts come through my mind. Like I've even moments before I've taken my last breath before a world record attempt had the thought, this is the last breath you're going to take.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that's like this little kind of impish voice in your head that's just saying the most kind of problematic thing.
Jump off the Empire State
Exactly.
Building. Jump.
And so you just let it slide. Like you recognize that instantly in the moment, and that thought doesn't get any airtime.
If you're a skydiver, if you're an extreme athlete, there's a part in your brain that knows this could be fatal. It's not like I go on my job and every day could be the last one, but every parachute jump could be the one where it doesn't open. Every insane triple backflip on a bike could be the one where the bike lands on you and you break your neck. So is there a part of that for you? Is there a part of every dive where you go, I'm aware that this could be my last dive. This could be not just not letting it in, but like, whether maybe that's a motivator, maybe there's a little adrenaline there. Are you chasing that? Is there any aspect of that for you?
Yeah, luckily, one thing about freediving, it maybe gets a worse rep than it deserves because, especially the discipline that I practice and what I see as like the purest form of freediving, which is no fins. So we don't use any fins or weights.
Okay.
You can wear weights, but you have to bring them back to the surface. So it's just your human body and what it can do underwater. And because you're not relying on anything auxiliary, there's very little that can go wrong. The body is a lot less fallible than the parachutes or the instruments that we design for sports normally. And then underwater, the water is the same at 100 meters as it is on the surface. It's just this uniform medium. There's nothing that's we know the dive site. There's not going to be any obstructions or anything, any problems under.
Pressure doesn't. I mean, obviously the pressure increases, but does that change? I know when I go to the bottom of a 9-foot swimming pool, my ears start to go. At 100 meters, is there just an incredible amount of pressure that makes it harder to move or to make decisions, or no? It's still all.
It doesn't make it harder to move. As long as you equalize your ears, then you won't feel the pressure. You'll feel like a collapsing of the lungs. They're a lot smaller than they can get on the surface. But we do a lot of stretching work for the lungs and for the diaphragm in order to accommodate that pressure. Yeah, the pressure at 100 meters is 3 times what it is inside your car tire kind of thing. But there's no it doesn't change the way that you move. Like the water feels at that depth exactly the same. Maybe a little colder depending on where you are.
Darker.
But darker,
Strange animals swimming around you.
There are some other things that happen. It's more psychological to do with the partial pressure of the gases. So at depth, the nitrogen in the air that we have in our lungs, as well as the carbon dioxide our body is creating, both become narcotic, and we have to we have to adapt ourselves to that because, otherwise that's like being very, very like on a pretty strong trip. And so it will impact your ability to swim, your ability to make decisions. So we expose ourselves sequentially to that narcosis in order to develop a tolerance to it.
And coming back up in terms of the bends and things like that, is that you have to train yourself?
It's not so much of an issue in freediving as long as we don't do more than one deep dive.
Okay.
Because you're only taking one lungful of air down and that's compressing compared to in a scuba dive, you're breathing. So one breath, say at 100 meters would have, if you took a full breath, would have 10 times the amount of oxygen and nitrogen as the one on the surface.
Gotcha.
So you're not absorbing as much nitrogen in a free dive.
Now you say you expose yourself to that narcosis to become tolerant of it. How do you do that?
Diving.
Practice. Yeah.
But actually my favorite type of free dive, which isn't the deepest free dive, is to go to a intermediate depth, like around 50 meters or 60, and stay down there just doing what we call a hang, where you're just like lying or holding onto the rope and motionless. And at that depth, the narcosis will start to build. And so your job is only just to kind of stay relaxed and accommodating of it. And through that exposure, you develop the tolerance. But those dives are incredible because your mind goes places that I've never been on the surface.
you said something on your page about how basically our evolution for survival is sort of outdated and something that doesn't really apply to today's world, and that we have adrenaline and cortisol that kicks in when we're under stress, and that actually becomes self-defeating, and that we have to find a way to get, actually, it sounded like you're saying get out of our nature to find a new way, a more adaptive way that is not consistent with the way that we're evolved to adapt. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So our environment and our activity is vastly different now to what it was when we were evolving over the course of millions of years. When we lived in caves and with tribes, we had daily physical threats to our lives, whether that was from a saber-toothed tiger or from the enemy tribe. And so we had to have a very strong sympathetic, so adrenaline, fight or flight, cortisol, response to any stresses, because most of the time stress was in a form that was going to eat us or try and kill us. And that served its purpose. In our modern life and activities, it doesn't serve a purpose anymore, because when you're waiting in line at Starbucks and the guy in front of you is taking, as I was this morning when I was ordering my coffee, 5 minutes to order a latte, then it doesn't help you to start to kind of get this boiling, this adrenaline flowing and an accelerated heart rate and using all these resources. The same thing if you're public speaking, or if you have a job interview, if you have an argument with your spouse, all these situations where we encounter daily stress or anxiety in our lives, none of them are benefited by the fight or flight reflex. But that is our evolutionary leftover tool for stress. And so it's outdated. We have to, and we can do it in the space of not even a lifetime, like in the space of short weeks. We can, the way I describe it is kind of upload a software patch to the subconscious mind so that your subconscious response to stress is going to be parasympathetic. You'll still have, like, if you have to run away from an attacker or a mountain lion or something, you'll still have that's never going to go away. But in all these other situations where you are, I don't know, at the dentist or at work in the boardroom, all these places where we encounter stress, you will have a different response to that. And you'll find yourself being more calm, breathing in a different way, and also operating in a different way mentally that allows you to perform better in those situations.
So how do you harness that? Is it meditation that you practice it through, or is it?
So the first step is to be able to trigger that nervous system through the breath or through mental techniques. And the second step is reprogramming the subconscious. And the reprogramming happens through taking on small challenges. Like, it's kind of like training for any sport. Like in tennis, you don't just go out there and play games. Like, you work on your backhand, small shots, and you just kind of put things together like this. So in the same way, if we take on like a small version of stress or anxiety, like you're stuck in traffic or you have to make a difficult phone call, and you say, okay, I'm going to be in this situation. Now I employ these techniques. And afterwards, you see and your subconscious sees that actually worked. Like, that gets a tick. That was so much better. I performed so much more efficiently. And so with each of these like small wins, it becomes more cemented into the subconscious mind. It becomes more familiar, and it's more likely that in the more intense versions, like the full-on fight with a family member, or the really difficult conversation at work, of the argument there, that you are going to automatically fall into that same system. So the game changer is when it becomes subconscious. And now these days, like, I have many different instances where I'm in a situation, and before I even realize that it's like a shitty, stressful situation, the first thing I'll notice is that my breathing's changed, and it's more like grounded into the belly with the diaphragm. And then I'll also notice that like mentally I'm more detached. I'm seeing everything that's happening as if I'm on the other side of like soundproof glass. And I'll notice that before I even notice consciously that it's
It's like your spidey sense is tingling. Like your body knows what's going on before your brain is caught up.
Yeah. And that's the power of the subconscious. And once you outsource it to that, then you have it forever.
It's so interesting because, you know, so often at the beginning of a journey like this, if you're trying to improve that, it requires the conscious choice. Like you say, okay, I'm going to do the XYZ breathing exercises, the training. And it feels silly sometimes in those moments. As an actor, I find that same thing where you're like, all right, I've got to do the breath work, or I've got to find the physical, you know, and it feels like performative. But there is a benefit to it in that, I mean, the same as an actor, we have this saying where you say you learn it so you can forget it.
Right.
You memorize the script. And then once you know it so well, you don't have to think, what's my next line? You just know it and you can be in the moment, you can be present. And I think that applies here as well, where you learn these techniques and they become second nature, like you say, so they become subconscious. So you don't have to think, okay, now I'm going to slow my breathing. Now I'm going to feel the chair underneath me. Now it just happens and the benefit is there.
Definitely. And what it also does is it changes the way that you frame anything that happens. There's good stuff that happens to you and there's bad stuff. But now all the bad stuff is actually good because it's training opportunity for these techniques.
Yeah.
So for instance, you like the smallest, most trifling one that I can think of is like, you can't go to your hairdresser because they're booked out or something. So you have to go to a different hairdresser and you're sitting there and you know that they're going to screw it up. And
it's
so
Ryan's nightmare.
And for some people, this would be kind of, you'd be feeling a little bit anxious about what they're going to do. But that's the perfect opportunity. You don't have anything else to do okay, I'm going to breathe into my belly. And then the stretch receptors in the diaphragm send the signal to the brain, activate the parasympathetic nervous system. You feel better. You get that instant reward. So now you have a positive feedback response for this technique. Do the same with the mental techniques. Next time, maybe the dentist. Next time, maybe eye surgery or something a little bit more like all of these cases are opportunities to train yourself to respond better in that situation. And then after a while, the training's done and it's there for life. I really believe that it's a kind of a permanent solution.
There's a relatively new approach or theory in trauma therapy referred to as Polyvagal Theory. Have you heard that term?
No.
And it kind of reminds me of that. It's kind of a difficult thing for even clinicians like myself to understand because it was originally a text that was written by a scientist who did a ton of research, and it's basically just a bunch of data. And so for feeling people like myself, it just feels very sort of cold. And it's like, how does this apply to actual therapy? But there have been books written to kind of make it for the layperson. And the best I understand it is kind of what you're describing. That, you know, for the layperson out there, you know, the sympathetic nervous system is what activates under stress to try to deal with stress. It's what kicks in the fight or flight. It makes you ideally run faster, jump higher, you know, fight the lion that's about to kill you, right? And the parasympathetic is what returns you back to calm, right? It's a thing which in polyvagal theory, the vagus nerve is the biggest nerve in the body that runs the length of your body. And it's the highway through which the somatic experience of the body is connected to the brain, right? So wherever you're feeling something in your body, that is a part of your consciousness. That is, the argument would be your body is a part of your mind. There's no mind-body connection. Your body is part of your mind because your nervous system is all connected. And though there's wisdom that comes from the experience of the nervous system bottom up as opposed to top down. And so from polyvagal theory, essentially the idea is we are conditioned, especially for people that are traumatized, we are conditioned to use our sympathetic nervous system to cope with stress. And we have to practice using what they call the brake or the vagus nerve brake, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, to actually reset to a place of calm. And that is something you foster over time when you're not in stress, so that when stress occurs, it's second nature to be able to do that. Because this is all great in theory, and it's a nice idea that we can learn how to deal with normal human anxiety and stress in a more productive way. But when you have trauma, when you have things that have happened in your life that have been really terrible and life-threatening, you become conditioned for more stress. And you become conditioned to try just to survive that, to try to adapt to that, to use your sympathetic nervous system more, and to have those that are people that have been highly traumatized are running on adrenaline and cortisol even when there is no stress. They're causing themselves their own stress because they're hypervigilant, right? So it becomes that much more of a heavy lift to strengthen the muscle of that brake to be able to stop that reaction from happening, so that you return to that ground point of zero where you're calm, and then when stress happens you can react to it with calm as opposed to with more stress and make it worse for yourself. Does that kind of sound like there's crossover there between what you're describing?
Yeah, I think I don't have as much experience of working with people who have that level of trauma, but perhaps one of the, like a good starting point would be for them just to experience what it is like to not have that stress, even for just a brief period. So to know what the capacity is. And I feel like the best way to do that is through using the breath and the mind in order to reverse engineer that completely calm state. And once they experience that, they're like, okay, I don't have to feel this way the whole time, feel the stress or the anxiety the whole time. There is this place that I can get to. And they'll now have the incentive to get back there and to try and use those techniques more in order to access that place, especially when they're triggered. So I think probably the first step is just to realize their potential, which I would say even that kind of person who has had extreme trauma, there is still the potential to bring them back to a place that is a lot more calm, peaceful than where they normally reside.
It's why there's such an easy one-to-one comp with what you do and what you preach, because you didn't start diving 100 meters. You start holding your breath above the ground, doing lung exercises where there isn't stress, like you say, it's practicing when there isn't the stressors there. So then when you're in that moment, you can rely on that training, and you can, you had the lung capacity that you didn't have before. And it's the same thing for someone who's, like you say, lowering those levels so your baseline is lower. So when you get to a stress, for you, holding your breath for 2 minutes is nothing. For me, that would be, the most challenging thing I'd ever done. But if I trained for a year or 2 years or whatever, I could probably get to a point where, okay, 2 minutes is now a manageable stress level. And so I think it's a very easy, like I said, one-to-one comp of whether you're talking about the physical nature of holding your breath, or you're talking about the mental nature of lowering that baseline so you're not constantly running at this high stress, energy that just allows you to kind of lower, like I said, lower your baseline. So when you do hit those moments of stress, you can handle it. It's not overwhelming,
Absolutely. And maybe for anyone who's listening to this and is kind of skeptical about whether that it can help them, there's a really quick, easy exercise that you can do. I call it the 3-second gap. It's basically a 3-second breath hold, but you do it on empty lungs. So if you're just sitting here, and you can try this as well if you want, just sitting here relaxed, and then take a breath in any way that you choose, breathe out, and just wait there with empty lungs for a slow count of 3. And while you wait in emptiness, an empty mind, empty lungs, decide to breathe in on your next breath through the nose and into the belly. And as you breathe in, decide on what your next thought is going to be. How are you going to use your mind next? So that's what I call the 3-second gap. And it's kind of like a fire break that can be used when you're experiencing stress. When you remember, you can just take this breath in, exhale with empty lungs, hold for 3 slow counts, and then breathe through the nose. And that gap, because often when the lungs empty, the mind also empties. And that just empty space in the mind for just a few seconds can be enough to disengage whatever cyclical negative thoughts that you were running on a loop with, and allow you the space to choose where you're going to go next with your mind. By breathing in that way, you're also stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system. And so you're relaxing the body and the mind. And critically, you're engaging the prefrontal cortex more. So you're more apt to problem solve, to be creative, to be calm and composed. So all it takes is just a few seconds, and you can completely change the direction. If you're freaking out, or if you're having an argument, or you're feeling kind of rage at something that's happened, then this little fire break, this 3-second gap, can be enough to course correct and get back to kind of a controlled state.
Mm-hmm.
I feel calm.
Yeah. I want to curl up and take a nap.
Right?
That's interesting. Because the prefrontal cortex and the sort of the executive in our mind can be the solution to so many things, but also can be part of the problem. So it's hard to know exactly when it's serving a good function and when it's not, because the prefrontal cortex is also what creates these thoughts, right? In terms of the self-defeating thoughts,
in collaboration with the amygdala.
You're right.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so if you breathe in a way that stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, then that suppresses the amygdala. So it's more of a pure prefrontal cortex without the kind of emotional, reactive side of the amygdala.
So kind of purely logical without that sort of mammalian fear-based emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea, yeah. And it's something that we all possess. Like, we have this neural pathway between the diaphragm, which is, for anyone who's unfamiliar with the diaphragm, it's a muscle that we can't see. So often we don't know, we forget that it's there. But it's basically like an upside down salad bowl in your torso. And when it contracts, it pulls, it flattens, so it pulls the air into your lungs. And when it relaxes, the air comes out. Mm-hmm. And so when those muscle fibers are activated, the stretch receptors in them send a signal to the brain to tell your brain that it's been used, and that triggers the parasympathetic nervous system. So all it takes is a conscious choice to use your diaphragm, and you will be sending a signal to your brain to calm yourself down.
It's also incredibly more efficient as a singer. To, if I find myself straining to hit a note or sustain a note, the second I remind myself to use that diaphragm and breathe into it, suddenly I've got another 2 steps on my range and things like that, that it produces so much more air. It's so much more, it gets more oxygen to everything. I had a question I wanted to ask you about. You seem to be a very chill, very Zen guy. Is it a chicken or the egg thing? Were you always like this, or did you become this way once you started freediving and realizing and getting your breath to a place where you can kind of trigger calm easily? Or were you always like this?
I don't know. You'd have to ask someone, because it's like when I'm too close to myself to have seen the change. I believe there's been a change.
Okay.
I believe that the freediving, these techniques have changed the way that I am, but people who are closer to me can confirm that, yes or no. Definitely, I had more issues when I was young with being kind of competitive and like hard-headed and egotistical. I mean, most teenagers, 20-year-olds are like that anyway, but I feel like freediving has helped me partially to kind of shed some of that. So there's definitely been a big change.
Were there feelings like that when you were a kid? I mean, when did you move from England to New Zealand?
Well, that was when I was very young. We left when I was 20 months and arrived in New Zealand when I was 5.
Gotcha.
So I grew up mostly in New Zealand.
Was it a 5-year trip across the oceans before you got there?
Doesn't need to take that long. We stopped off.
Me too. Sounds like it could be nice though.
We kind of played connect the dots with all the islands on the way,
Yeah.
and a few of them we spent more time, like British Virgin Islands and Tahiti. Went to school in Moorea.
Stay in only British colonies where you had.
It was easier, I guess.
Right. Passports.
And the idea was actually to live in Tahiti, but it was very difficult to get residency or anything, or to work there for my parents. So we went to New Zealand initially to work and with the idea of coming back to French Polynesia. And then just got ensconced in New Zealand, and we went to school, and that became our lives.
From the conversation that we've been having, there's something that's been coming to my mind that I kind of want to raise. It's kind of a zoom out in terms of how this applies to us as people in general. It sounds like something that everyone would want for themselves, both in terms of performance, to be able to harness your peak potential and be able to calmly navigate stress in productive ways. But just in general, to be able to be sort of zen in the way that you go through your life and not complicate things further. And now I mentioned trauma and trauma therapy and how that can be more challenging for people who are wired for stress to a higher degree than other people. And something that happens a lot with those types of people, myself included, is that we have a hard time giving up that feeling of being hypervigilant. It's almost like an addiction at a certain point. And I, in terms of zooming out, I think that's a symptom of the culture that we live in and the society that we live in because of intergenerational trauma and because of the nature of the way that we have to live in, let's just say, a capitalistic society in terms of the demands of making money and being productive constantly. It's a productive culture. It's like, why do we drink as much coffee as we do? We're essentially just stimulating our sympathetic nervous system. We're putting ourselves in fight or flight because it feels good to be on edge and keyed up and feel like we're going to be more productive. We're going to be able to react to things quicker. We're going to think more clearly. And that's more of what you were describing in terms of that older model of evolution where we rely on adrenaline and cortisol to solve all our problems. So how do you get people to buy in to the idea that this is actually a more evolved way to be when so much of our culture is about this stress-based, fear-based, ego-based way of coping with stress?
Yeah, excellent analysis and question. In New Zealand, we have a very strong rugby team. And there was a captain of the rugby team who's probably one of the top rugby players of all time, Richie McCaw. And he had a system called red mind, blue mind, which essentially translates to parasympathetic and sympathetic. And you can see it when he's on the field, because when the game is playing and the ball's in play, he is the hardest worker. He is like playing on when he's got like fractured feet and all the rest of it. But then when the whistle is blown, there's a penalty or an injury or something, he looks like he's lounging on the French Riviera. Like he's completely calm, composed, and relaxed. And being able to switch between the two was, I think, in his case, instrumental to him becoming probably the greatest rugby player of all time. Because otherwise, if you're only red mind, if you're only sympathetic, then you're like a berserker who comes onto the field and either burns out after 15 minutes or gets an injury and they're done. The same thing in our lives. Like if we are only able to only have one system, which is the red, the sympathetic, then we will burn out at 10:30 in the morning or at the age of 33 years old or something. Like we're not going to have that endurance. But being able to having the capacity to switch between red and blue, to switch between sympathetic and parasympathetic when necessary, that gives you endurance, gives you control over what system you're using. And so you're the one who's choosing how you are activated, how you're engaged. So I think that's the answer, even in our lives today when, yes, as you say, there's so much more stress, so much more kind of requirements of us. It's even more important for us to be able to allot our energy and our resources in a way that's intelligent and that's determined by what's going to give us the best results.
So balance kind of seems to be the answer to all questions. It's like there's a place for both. We need both in our lives. And I love that. I love, some of my favorite athletes are the ones who are people that you see them in the heat of the battle.
And they're a maniac.
And they're so
They're
intense
killers.
and this is all that matters in that moment. And they're singularly focused on doing the task at hand to win that contest. And then the second the game is over, they're smiling and they're
Or
just
an
like,
interview, and you're like, they're the nicest, gentlest guy in
and
the
they're
world.
calm and down to earth,
Yeah.
and you're just like, wow,
Yeah.
that is a next level kind of way of looking at life, where you don't have to give up being, an absolutely killer kind of competitive person to go out and do the things you want to accomplish in your life in order to have calm in your life, in order to have sustainability, and vice versa. I think a lot of people think that if I meditate, if I become Zen, like I'm going to lose my drive.
edge.
I'm going to lose my ability to go out in the world and accomplish things. What am I going to do? Just sit around in the lotus position all day and just do nothing? It's like, no, you do that so that you can do the things you do in your life more sustainably, so that you have endurance, so that you have the ability to reset to that baseline of calm, so that when you are in the midst of the battle, you're able to do it more effectively.
And in my experience, I'd add that it's easier to go in one direction than the other. So it's easier to go to activation, to the red, to the sympathetic, than it is to go backwards to the relaxed.
Sure.
And so that's kind of requires a little bit more work and techniques, because
Yeah.
we all know how to get ourselves fired up, right? But being able to calm ourselves down is a little more, takes more finesse. But as you say, I mean, there's so many examples of athletes, and that's why one of the reasons I love watching tennis is because typically the ones who play the best or who win the matches are the ones who have that capacity, like Federer. He's this kind of incredible force of energy during the point, but then afterwards he's just kind of lounging around and completely relaxed. And so, there's something to be said for that faculty to switch between the two.
I'm still working on that. I'm getting the calm part down, because I can get up really quick, but getting back to a Zen state is a lot harder.
Well, I'm still dealing with that too, to a certain extent, just in terms of like, I feel like in order to harness my most aggressive like drive in me that I sometimes want to harness, I need that extra cup of coffee. I need something, and I don't feel like I'm quite there unless I feel quite a little bit on edge, a little bit almost anxious, like riding that edge of being anxious. Then I feel like I'm thinking more clearly, and I'm working faster, or whatever it is that I've conditioned my mind to think that's the state I need to be in order to be an optimal peak performance. I think you can harness that in either direction. It's better calibrating your ability to shift between those states.
A lot of times I'm always fascinated by athletes who are like, before a game, I'll get a run in, and then I'll lift for half an hour. And I was like, if I lifted for half an hour, I'd be dead for the next 2 days. And you forget that these guys are at the peak of physical ability, which actually is a question I wanted to ask you. Because of your expanded lung capacity, ability, to deal with lower levels of oxygen, when you're at just normal walking, do you have this just superhuman, it's like being on the moon? Do you, like for the rest of us, like, do you have aerobic abilities? Could you run a marathon? Do you, you know what I mean? Do you have benefits of having?
So firstly, my lung capacity isn't anything, it's more or less average.
Okay.
We have a technique where you can pack in more air above a full lung volume, but that can be taught to anyone as well. So that's not where any ability in freediving is derived from. It's more to do with efficiency and oxygen storage in the body as well, in the myoglobin and hemoglobin. Myoglobin in the muscle, hemoglobin in the blood. But I think if I tried to run a marathon, I would probably blow out my knees or my ankle after 10 kilometers or so.
Well, you're used to being weightless, or at least relatively.
Yeah.
So we're well over the hour. I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to make sure that I give you an opportunity to talk about, I know you have a charity organization that or you're a conservationist, and that you have a coaching program, and you're a speaker. So any of these things you want to just share with us briefly before we sign off?
Sure, yeah. So we've been talking quite a bit about the techniques which are embedded into the mental immune system. That's the system that I am starting to teach now, not just to athletes and people in sport, but also to kind of CEOs and people in business, but also these techniques apply just as well to our kind of the stress and challenges that we face in day-to-day life as well. So anyone who kind of comes across pressure in their life, which is pretty much everyone these days, can benefit from these techniques. And they, as I said before, they're part of our system and therefore don't come with any problems with them. So that's the mental immune system. That's, I think there's a link through my website, which is williamtrubridge.com or mentalimmunesystem.com. And we've also started to run kind of corporate retreats where we teach these systems, as well as something called the Rebel Path, which is basically a way of expanding people's concept of where their limits are. So we have these kind of like concentric circles of like comfort zone, something that's probably on the cusp, and something that's definitely impossible. And we can expand those circles so that we basically have more real estate in our lives of things that we can potentially do, that we're capable of. So in all these cases, they're techniques that I feel like I've been taught them by the ocean rather than kind of come up with them by myself. It's like I'm a pearl diver and I've gone down and found this incredible pearl, and I want to show as many people as I can the benefits of it, like what it can achieve. So this is like a new direction or a new part of my life that I'm moving into, where I'm trying to kind of take these techniques and give them to anyone who can benefit from them.
Share the pearl.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Well, this has been a really fascinating conversation. Cool. It's been awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Yeah. Join us every Tuesday for new episodes of the Harder to Breathe podcast. We want to thank our guest, William Trubridge, this week again. Join us next Tuesday. We'll see you next time right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast.